You mentioned Harvard, about which you've written recently. I'll throw Yale in, about which you've also written.
Yes.
They've got sizable endowments. They are tax-exempt endowments. Is that exemption a subsidy?
The endowment itself, I would not view as a public subsidy. You could argue it is a private subsidy. It's an outside force that has brought in resources to the school. In a sense, it's a subsidy, but it is not a public subsidy. And in and of itself would it seemingly not really call for public policy intervention of any kind. I mean, just look in the abstract. But in reality, of course, the magnitudes of some of these endowments has gotten so large that it becomes a question of public policy because there are tax advantages that donors receive in order to give to universities. The universities are engaged in massive investment activities, apparently. I mean, if you got a $50 billion endowment like Harvard, you're not just sitting on CDs that you keep at the local bank. You're doing something very active with that. Yale, in particular, was extremely aggressive at investing in all sorts of alternative funds and so forth. All of that is, in a sense, is getting special public treatment by the tax laws, and so in a sense, it is a subsidy. And so the question is, well, why should we subsidize Harvard University when we have poor people who deserve it more than the people that go to Harvard? I mean, this is an argument, an equity argument that some people will use, and it has some validity to it. I'm at a school where mid-quality state university with maybe $30,000 a year in spending for each student that attends the university, $35,000. Harvard receives an endowment way over $100,000 a year just in income coming in. If they close the door to Harvard, they say Harvard is closed for the next 10 years. We're going on vacation for 10 years. Harvard would still be receiving a couple $2 billion a year in endowments. And so I think the question is this right? Started to come up a few years ago. And I attended, indeed, the very first hearing on this in 2017 when they adopted an endowment tax. I was there. I was involved in it from the beginning, not necessarily advocating for it, by the way, but just saying, well, here are the on the one hand, here are the arguments for it, here are the arguments against it, etc. And they did adopt an endowment tax that affects maybe 30 schools or so.
Mm-hmm. And you have written about increasing. You've covered and written about, opined upon proposed increases to that tax on the net investment income of endowments for sort of certain colleges, usually the bigger ones or the ones with the bigger endowments. Is that sort of more ripe a proposal now than it has been, or no?
Well, I think it's getting more attention. The universities used to be, from the politician's point of view, used to have positive impact. Whenever you were for colleges, you're winning votes. Whenever you were against colleges, you were losing votes. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, colleges were popular. Now, today's colleges are less popular. And so the political dynamic has changed. The political calculus has changed. And so there are congressmen who 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would have been dead set against an endowment tax, who are now in favor of it. And some of them, Senator, one of my own senators, Senator J.D. Vance, I read his proposal yesterday, and I said, I can't believe it. He almost wants to confiscate the endowments of schools. It sounded to me like, I suspect I'm misreading what he said, but he wanted to increase the tax 35-fold or something.
35%.
Huh?
35%.
35%. Yeah, and I'm not sure what the 35% is on. If it's on income earned, that's that's a pretty hefty tax. If it's on capital gains over the past year or something, that's even more, it's one could argue it's a near punitive tax. Let's put Harvard out of business. And it doesn't go quite that far, but it's certainly in that direction. And I personally have my doubts about that. By the way, I didn't say this in the Wall Street Journal piece you wrote, but because I was limited in the number of words I could write to fewer than 500, but I have actually shown some reservations about endowment taxes. They have a lot of problems associated with them. First of all, they only apply to schools with endowments, and a lot of the problems with higher education come from the 99% of income that the schools receive that is non-endowment related. So picking on endowments is picking on cherry picking a group of schools. At the moment, it's just 2 or 3 dozen. And maybe that's not the appropriate approach. Maybe if you want to tax universities, even if you want to tax university, maybe you ought to tax their property instead, or maybe you ought to tax their sales of, football game tickets. We were informally talking about football before we began. Maybe when you go the next week, Michigan is playing Washington for the national championship. Maybe there ought to be $100 a ticket tax on that game, which would raise millions right there. I'm not saying that's the optimal solution, but I'm saying there are other ways you can attack this problem other than taxing endowments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The piece I've referenced several times now, and you just did, quoted Milton Friedman. Am I wrong to read his email to you from whatever year that was as being receptive to taxation of?
Yeah. Now, Milton Friedman wrote me when he was 91 years old in the year 2003. So Friedman has since passed away, and he certainly didn't have the advantage, maybe disadvantage, of knowing all that has happened since. But having met Friedman and talked to him some and know his son and members of his family, I cannot believe that if he were not alive today, he would be very concerned about higher ed, and he would favor some sort of taxation of university, whether it be an endowment tax or not. I'm not sure that would be the way he would go, but I think there's a chance he would be in favor of a big endowment tax.
He referenced in the communication to you negative externalities.
Yeah.
What did he mean by that? What are those? What were those? I guess is the fair way to ask that question here.
Well, some things are nuisances. They have negative effects. Pollution. Factory puts a lot of smoke into the air, a lot of stuff in the air that is dangerous, particulate matter that is harmful to people. Streams get polluted where people like to go fishing. When those kinds of things happen, that's a negative externality. And universities, most people say, well, universities don't have negative externalities. There are a bunch of egghead professors sitting in buildings somewhere. They don't have much impact. And for the most part, that's probably true. But if universities are going out and fomenting people to, I don't want to get too much into current policy, but fomenting people to hate certain groups of people or behave in a riotous way, that's a negative externality. That's harmful to society.
Might there be negative externalities arising from private foundation endowments?
Well, Adam Smith, writing in 1776, and I've quoted this many, many times. Actually, it's a much more interesting quote than the Friedman quote. But as I said, I only had 500 words with the Wall Street Journal, so I could. Adam Smith said, the teaching at Oxford has gone way down qualitative wise. because now the professors, darn it, they have to go out. They don't have to go out and raise their own money. Used to be apparently at Oxford around 1600, say, you'd go into a classroom and you'd pay the professor for the fees, and then the professor presumably would take a little bit of that money and maybe pay it to the university for administrative costs, the use of the classroom and so forth. I don't know precisely how it worked, but then big endowments started coming in, and so Oxford said, well, we'll pay you a salary. You don't have to go out and raise your own money. And Smith says the quality of teaching went down because the professors no longer prepared very well because they weren't in the marketplace themselves. The college, the university, Oxford was in the market. So there's a little bit of truth to that, I think. As one who's taught at both expensive private schools and with big endowments and small public schools or public schools with poor endowments, I can see how endowments could lead to some laziness, some lack of attention to student detail and all. I understand why Smith said what he did.
And just hypothetically, a proposal, any proposal, there might be some coming soon, I don't know, right, to increase the taxation of net investment income on private foundation endowments. That would be subject to the same analysis you've all just laid out now in the context of higher education, no? Or
yeah, I think generally so. And by the way, I'm coming on as an ogre who hates private endowments, which is not true, as one who has personally in my own charitable giving given money to colleges and universities, including my alma mater, which is one of those 30 or 35 schools that's considered to be too rich. It doesn't need money. One of those that are paying taxes to the government. I went to one of those schools and I wrote a check. I write a check every year to them for a little bit of money. So I think it's wonderful that people contribute to school. Indeed, one of the strengths of American higher ed compared with higher ed most places in the world is American higher ed has this private philanthropic force, which is incremental to all the other things positive that we have in this country, that gives us an extra boost. You see, Oxford, Cambridge have some endowments, some schools do, but you don't see much of so-called private education or private support in most places in the world. I think this is a strength of America. So I hate to see that die, but on the other hand, it is legitimate to raise questions about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess 35% is high, I'll admit.
Yeah.
But if you let's just say hypothetically that's an opening bargaining position for a future Congress or something like that.
Yeah, probably
so
is.
I can't pick a number, but call it. I mean, Harvard's not going to die, is it?
Well, no. If Harvard closed today for the next 10 years, just because it is like we're not going to teach, we're going to let things calm down for a while, then we'll restart. The college would flourish in the meantime because it would be earning a couple $2 billion in investment income every year, which it would probably then invest. Endowment would go up if they didn't have to do anything. It's like any other foundation.
How, Professor, is the Ohio Bobcats football team going to do next year?
Now you've reached a really how is any football team going to do?
Yes, the prediction I'm asking
with all of
prediction from an economist. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm an economist, which makes that question a dubious question, if I may say so. But secondly, the area of football, which in past years I would say would be something you could predict with some degree of certainty, but with these transfer portals and everything else, now players can pick up and move. I'm surprised some player at halftime hasn't said, I don't like the way things are going today. I think I'm going to go down and play at another school tomorrow. There's a game tomorrow at another school. I think I'll go join them. It hasn't gotten quite that far yet, but it's made it very hard to predict the success of teams.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with us today. I totally appreciate your time, Richard Vedder.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.